would rather be a filmmaker than anything else that I know. Actresses, I am not very fond of using established actresses. They like just the left side of their face photographed, and that's too much trouble. So I always put new actresses. And in that way I found quite a number of stars like Carol Lombard, Rita Hayworth, Angie Dickinson, Lauren Bacall. All of them were just made their first picture with me. Well, Marilyn Monroe was a personality. She was not a great actress at all. She was really a frightened little girl who never thought that she was good enough to do what she did.
Lucky you!
Best 36 holes in golf.
You tuned in to Alternate Shots Podcast,
Arnie's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Marquis, Sandy's,
poker,
Bond, James Bond.
horse racing,
I'm all in.
great movies.
Alfred Hitchcock.
We have no script.
And down the stretch they come.
We're glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Whoop, let's start again.
What sort of a childhood did you have? Were you interested in movies way back?
Not really. I'm not interested in them now, actually.
And I took a job at the studio to earn money during summer vacation. And it just happened that Doug Fairbanks was making a picture in the East, and he wanted a modern setting. And I'd had about 7 years of architecture. The man who did all the sets and did that kind of stuff was down in Arizona, and they didn't know what to do. And I said, I can draw, get him a set.
Ignorance. There's no authority in the world like it.
But there's got to be something more than that technically. I mean, how did you know that?
You know technically that the whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half. I kid you not.
Well, Billy, we're getting around to it. We're right in the meat of our fantasy world here in Hollywood. And today's episode is called what is it called? Directors.
Action.
Cut. Reese, line, please. What is it?
Two dopes scoping out some of the big-time Hollywood directors.
Yeah,
four in particular.
Right, and before everybody nails us, and why don't we include Frank Capra or some other director that you love and so forth. We just picked a few, and we're going to go into some more maybe in another day. But today we picked John Ford, we picked Howard Hawks, Orson Welles, and Alfred Hitchcock. So, Billy, we kind of previewed those four at the beginning of this episode. We'll get into each one of those because they all have unique, but there are some crossovers with each of the two that you know about.
Yeah, there's several crossovers. For instance, John Ford used Greg Toland in his movie The Grapes of Wrath, which was an incredible movie.
Great movie.
And of course Orson Welles used him as a cinematographer in Citizen Kane. And the respect that Hollywood had for Toland is marvelous. So working with these big directors was as much a treat for them as it was for him.
It's not the venue. It's not the actor. It's not the script. It is the director that's telling the story. That's what we've learned from these four gentlemen and everybody else that's around them.
So important that the director understands the movie inside and out. It tells him how he wants to shoot it and how he wants to portray all the action or lack of action in some cases. And, you know, when you were talking about crossovers, one of the most unique ones was the fear of policemen that both Howard Hawks and Alfred Hitchcock had, probably for different reasons.
So we're going to talk a little bit about John Ford. He's a bit of a surly Irishman.
Mr. Ford, I'll probably get the pronunciation wrong, but I believe your real name is Sean O'Fean, is it, or Fine? How Irish are you? Are you 100% Irish?
Oh, centuries bad. O'Fana.
O'Fean.
Sean O'Fana.
When did you come to America?
I was born here.
What sort of a childhood did you have? Were you interested in movies way back?
Not really. I'm not interested in them now, actually. It's a way of making a living.
Well, that's John Ford in a sentence or two. He never used a word if he didn't need to use it. And
Right.
that's the same as if he was talking to one of the actors or lighting guys or Greg Toland. It didn't matter who he was talking to. He was a surly, direct guy, all business.
And he's known for his, like, I don't want to use the word epic as much as vast Westerns. It was always a big scope picture, always a large scene.
Well, speaking of large scenes, Orson Welles, who we'll talk about later on, said you could always know it was a John Ford film just by the way that scene was set up, that it was blocked and whatnot. And you have some experience here.
Well, yeah, well, again, the way John Ford looked at a movie like The Grapes of Wrath or Stagecoach was a big thing. It was a countrywide kind of thing, and he showed those views. So you always saw a big, How the West Was Won is a perfect example of the vastness of John Ford. It was shot in Cinerama, which was a wraparound kind of thing, but it was tons and tons of stars and tons of scenery. And then, Western stories.
But Grapes of Wrath, it felt like we went to 1,200 miles from wherever they started out with little or no rubber on their tires. Seemed like 25 people on that jalopy or whatever you call that thing. He took us through the tumble brush.
I am really a coward. I know I am. So that's why I did foolish things. And I was decorated 8 or 9 times. Trying to prove that I was not a coward. But after it's all over, I still know that I was a coward. I've always found out the little quiet little man that nobody pays any attention to usually has more guts. Can you use guts in BBC? Sure. Has more guts and courage than the big blowhard, the big noisy.
And likewise with How Green Was My Valley. Both those movies are poignant, but there's very little happiness in any of them. You don't get much relief in either of those movies from the travails of the people involved.
If you wanted happiness, you'd have to go watch The Quiet Man, which is, I'd say, a nod of his cap to his parents' homeland, Ireland.
Yep, and he used Maureen O'Hara, who was actually Irish as well in that movie, with of course John Wayne, the Duke. Yeah. The incomparable. Some people aren't as big of fans, and some people are ridiculously big fans of John Wayne. But John Wayne was a professional, and John Ford figured out John Wayne early.
He put him on the map. According to what I heard, he was his third prop guy or second prop guy, and they were going to come up with this movie, Stagecoach. And the writer, the producer said, well, who are you going to get? And he says, I'm having a hard time getting people. He says, I'm going to use this young kid out of college. And they said, well, you want me to send you a screenplay? He says, no, we trust you. And he put John Wayne in the picture. But let's see what Lee Marvin, you talked about scenes, and let's expand it to complicated scenes. Let's see first what Lee Marvin has to say about John Ford, and then how he dealt with complicated scenes.
So much has been written about the man, and I think some of it seems to paint him as this simple kind of Irishman, but in reality he was really a very complex person.
He was an intellect. Tough Irish intellect. I don't think there can be anything worse than that. In other words, he has all the demons in him, the Irish demons. And he's also intelligent.
Here's a guy who worked with him. I'm sure he might not have said exactly what he was saying if John Ford was alive. But, I mean, look at the face on Lee Marvin.
Well-known face. And that guy ran the gamut in acting also, from the villain to the hero. From The Dirty Dozen to a movie called The Big Heat with Glenn Ford, where he plays a really low-down mobster.
He had range that, say, John Wayne didn't have.
He was a great actor.
He tells a story about John Ford saying, okay, we're going to do this picture. I want you to come do it. He said, well, okay, but it's my policy to read a script and before I commit to a picture. He said, well, don't you want to spend 8 weeks in Hawaii in the summertime? Yeah. He said, don't you want your children to get brown like beans? Yeah. Yeah, I'll do the picture. And that was
That's enough of the script for me.
That was Donovan's Reef, and it was John Ford's kind of aloha to all of his buddies. He invited all of his buddies to do this film. It was like a, spring break in the summer in Hawaii, paid by the producers, and all these guys had a fun time. Let's go to the point I said earlier about how John Ford, who I thought was brilliant, but how he set up a complicated scene. This is fabulous.
And when the script is written, etc., if there was ever a difficult scene, he'd always shoot it at the end of the day. So he'd break for tea about 4. And they'd say, all right, now we're going to do this scene. So, walk through it, put the marks down, and go for the first take. Now we're all set and all juiced and ready to go, right? And he'd look at his watch and say, all right, that's the wrap, first shot in the morning.
It's like getting Tiger Woods out on the driving range for his 9 o'clock tee off time at 8 o'clock and saying to him, no, your tee off time's at 2.
Right.
These actors, they're athletes too. They get all ready for their line and so forth. And you can see the excitement, and they know their marks, and each of these people have different roles to play, and they're looking at going through that scene.
Well, imagine if you're supposed to sing the national anthem before the Super Bowl or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. You're going to be nervous. You're going to be worked up. How you're going to do this, blah, blah, blah. I'm all set. Never mind. We're not going to do that right now. It's like, whoa.
Now you leave the set like this, you're wired. And all night long you're saying, hey, geez, I was ready to go. I mean, why did I have to live with this like this? And she was right. Then you start to criticize yourself in the scene. You say, oh my God, I would have done that. Oh, it's wrong. So now you come to work the next morning knowing how you're going to change what you're doing. And you see that the set has all changed. All the marks are up, the camera's gone, everything. You say, all right, now let's run that scene again. Totally different and right. In other words, he'd let you sweat it for a night, and he'd sweat it for a night. And you do it in the morning. I mean, that's how bright he was about it.
So he was basically taking his second chance first.
This is a question about, did John Ford direct John Wayne?
So that communication between actor and director.
Oh no, Ford had talked to Duke all the time.
Yeah.
Oh no, he directed Duke. And I think Duke relied on him very much to direct him. Because I think that Duke felt very, very enamored of what Jack, Coach, Papa, what do they call him, had done for his career. Because he'd say, oh, don't do that, Duke. And Duke would go like that and then do what he told him to do, and boy, it was just brilliant. I mean, I think Ford was very responsible for Wayne's tremendous persona.
John Wayne was a third prop man before he met John, before he got into pictures. He met him before that and so forth. It turns out that John Ford was the godfather of all of John Wayne's children and all of his grandchildren. I'd never heard of anything like that before.
Wow. But it shows you the vision that a director like John Ford had. He was able to spot, I don't know if you call it talent or charisma, or as Lee Marvin said, a persona that he could develop right then and there, which was correct. As Lee Marvin has said a couple of times, it was right. He was right.
So, Billy, let's move on from John Ford to Howard Hawks, who actually turned out to be best of friends. And Hawks admits that he stole from Ford and Ford stole from Hawks. And it's also not lost on me how these people got into filmmaking, into the movies. Here, Howard Hawks was studying at Cornell up in Ithaca, New York. He had a summer job at the studio. And it was probably picking things up and moving them from here to there, moving chairs around and all that and getting $2 an hour while he wasn't in semester. But listen to how he got a break into movies. It was not that different from John Wayne getting a break from John Ford
Right.
That break into Stagecoach made
Right.
John
Right
Wayne.
place, right time.
It was about 1916. I was at college taking a course in mechanical engineering back at Cornell University in New York. And I took a job at the studio to earn money during summer vacation. And it just happened that Doug Fairbanks was making a picture in the East, and he wanted a modern setting. And I'd had about 7 years of architecture. The man who did all the sets and did that kind of stuff was down in Arizona, and they didn't know what to do. And I said, I can draw, get him a set.
Imagine that.
So I made the set, and Doug came back and he looked at it and he said, this is just what I wanted. Who the hell did this? And they introduced me to him. And he looked at me and he said, you look like you might be a pretty good athlete. And I said, I am. What do you do? And I said, well, I'm a 4 handicap at golf. And I was junior champion playing tennis. And, oh, hell, he said, come on out and play with me this next weekend. We became good friends.
This is in the infancy of Hollywood too. I mean, you're going to start to go from silence to talkies, as they called them back then. And the opportunities were growing, I assume, at all times. And there wasn't as much of a demand as there is now. Like, who knows how many people go to Hollywood to try and hit the big time now versus then. But this just shows you he and John Wayne both kind of backed into huge careers.
Yeah, it's almost like he jumped on the horse and now he's designing sets.
Yeah.
Wait till you hear the next part of the story.
And he was going through the courtship stage with Mary Pickford. And he said to Mary, why don't you put Howard in as your real property man? She said, okay. And I did a couple of things that she liked, so she made me her assistant director.
Property man, AD.
And one day the director got drunk and she said, I guess we can't work any. And I said, why don't we make some scenes? And she said, can you do it? And I said, sure. And we made some scenes and she was very pleased with them. And that was my start as a director.
Right place, right time. That's what I mean. It's incredible. He might not have even known how good at this stuff he was, if not for this confluence of events. He might have been designing engines.
100 years ago, with no social media, he moved through not knowing anything about Hollywood to being in the middle of Hollywood, the 2 biggest Hollywood people of the time.
Right. With Chaplin, the 3 of them, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, were pretty much the Hollywood.
So he's not the first person we're going to talk about today that learned by watching movies. And we'll talk about how Orson Welles at 26 became a director and an actor. Never was a director before, but listen to how he learned.
I realized how little I knew about pictures. And I went to see a picture every night, and sometimes 2, and sometimes I saw the same one 2 times or 3 times. And I went to mostly pictures that were directed by good directors. And I think I learned quite a little bit, and I've got a good memory, so I've had no trouble from that time on figuring out where the camera ought to go, what you should do, and telling a story. Because in my opinion, the director is just a storyteller. And he ought to use the best way photographically and the best way with titles, and the best way with action that he can tell a story.
Isn't that the essence of being a director right there?
There's, he's kind of touching on something that I've been known for a long time, that there's a photographic eye. I don't know what the expression actually means, but someone who knows how to frame a shot, composition, that's extremely important. And you would think, people who can do that think everybody can do it, but everybody can't do it. And you can see that very often, if you look at snapshots, you'll see the guy's face in the equal amount of room above his head. It's like that was not framed correctly. You know, when I went into television, as an aside, I was a cameraman. I kind of knew how to frame everything because I had watched TV so many times. But what I never realized was what they call leading somebody. So if you're interviewing somebody, for instance, you don't shoot them square on. You have them one side or the other, depending on which side the interviewer's on. You lead them a little bit. And like a great golf course, people don't always understand what they love about what they're watching, but there are intricate details involved in that. There was intricate details in the design of Wingfoot that Tilling has to understood that we can learn about, but we didn't know when we went out there what we loved about the place. It was just a work of art. And it's the same thing with a movie, but there's a lot of little intricate things that go in there and talent that is hidden from most people in the world because they're just seeing the finished product. And I think even Howard Hawks is pointing out he didn't know how much talent he had.
Well, because in a Western, you get outside, out in the desert, out in the outdoors, and it's very pleasant to work. And also I enjoy working with John Wayne, and John Wayne has been in all the Westerns that I've made. And we like each other, and it's very easy to work with him. He just says, what do? I tell him, and he never says one word. He just does it.
He just knew how to do this. For some reason, he had an eye for composition, and he had a knack for telling a story. Not everybody does.
Now, John Ford was surly, but he still got to the point of the story, the interesting bits.
And we'll find a lot of that with Hitch, too.
Yeah, it's going to toss up between Hitchcock or Orson Welles or Howard Hawks. Who tells a better story? I mean,
and they all tell them different ways.
I think Hitchcock's the best storyteller, but I could be argued that, first of all, Orson Welles didn't make as many movies as any of these guys. His famous movie was Citizen Kane, which we'll get to. But they tell a story, and he could tell story after story after story. As long as he didn't need a break, he could just keep going on, and they're all interesting. And the way he told it. And the people they knew. I didn't know who Howard Hawks knew when he was a college kid at Cornell, but over that summertime, he knew the two most powerful people in Hollywood, and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Mary Pickford. So then he knew everybody. This is my guy Howard. This is my guy Howard. Hey, here's my director Howard. Here's my, and on and on and on.
So he got an immediate respect.
And all he did was use common sense to go to the movies, probably a lot of John Ford movies, and see how things looked. And he'd say, well, how did he do that?
Yeah. But again, something inside him was touched by all of this, and he never saw it coming. And there it was, all at once.
We're going to go into a more specific story about actors and actresses. We all know that Bogey fell in love with Bacall. Was it at To Have and To Have Not in that movie? Probably.
Yeah. And she was basically a 19-year-old kid, I think, at the time.
Yeah, and Howard Hawks was talking to Bacall and said, well, sometimes people fall in love through the movie, and you're acting out a persona in the movie.
I don't like the very feminine girl who's in pink and baby blue and curls and prim and everything. They don't interest me at all. I like an honest, forthright girl. So that shows up in the pictures. When Bacall fell in love with Bogart, and he with her, and she told me about it, I said, I'll tell you one thing. I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't in love with the girl in the scenario. And if I were you, and if you're smart, and if you love him, you better keep on acting this way all the time.
That's the crossover between life and acting in a real scenario.
You see it all the time in Hollywood, actor marrying actor. And you also see them breaking up a lot. But Bogey and Bacall made it the whole way. That's rare out there. Kurt Russell, Goldie Hawn still together after all these years. That's rare. Some of these, Elizabeth Taylor had, 8 husbands? So
4 or 5 of them were Richard Burton. It's the same guy. Couldn't make up her mind.
But the point is, it was part of their work. Is like with anything, they learn a lot about somebody that they work with for a long time, and people are people, so they get attracted to each other, and then sometimes real life comes along and shows them they're not in the movie, and boom, they're gone again. But not Bogey and Bacall. She was with him till the end.
The other thing you learn from these great movie directors, and you hear these interviews, what's the single most important thing by being a director or a filmmaker, other than the story? The single most important thing is to make money.
Of course. So budgets become important. And, sometimes these days, like a movie like Mission Impossible, you could, how much money does it cost to make one of those movies, or the James Bond movies? But some of these old movies, the budgets were not that big, and they were very successful because they were either parlor mysteries, and it was all done with cameras and acting and not special effects. And Hitchcock managed both ways. He could keep you entertained on a lot of levels, from climbing up Mount Rushmore or hanging from the Statue of Liberty, to Dial M for Murder, where it all takes place basically in an apartment room.
So you're giving a little glimpse into, and we're gonna come to a close on this episode, the part 1A of great filmmakers, great Hollywood directors. And we've talked about John Ford and Howard Hawks. John Ford made over 145 films, and Howard Hawks made 40. So there's 185 films. If you haven't seen a Hawks or a Ford film, start with Stagecoach with John Ford, or
Grapes of Wrath.
Grapes of Wrath, and who shot Liberty Valance? So that was,
that's Ford also. The man who shot Liberty Valance.
And in Hawks, we got to tell you about Have and Have Not.
Yep. That's Bogey and Bacall. That's Lauren Bacall's start in films, and Bogey at his best was after Casablanca, and Bogey had established himself as a great kind of hero, tough guy, smoking cigarette, little smart hero, very, very popular at the time.
That's the look we're looking at right there. Well, that'll be a wrap for this episode. So thanks a lot, Billy. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was fun. I love these movies.
I would rather be a filmmaker than anything else that I know. And Cary Grant is the best comedian. So in making comedies, I've only used Cary Grant, and I make it easy for myself.
Mr. Hitchcock, why do you always make mystery films?
Well, life is a big mystery, isn't it? It always has been. I think people are intrigued by mystery to find out about things they don't know anything about. That's a mystery.
Why are you laughing?
Well, at least we have the laugh to add at the end.
Right. We've gone from 12 handicaps at this to 19 handicaps in just a week.
That's what happened. Somebody changed my grip, and the next thing you know, I can't do the podcast anymore. I felt like I was in the first row of the first pew at church right during the sermon.
And your brother was poking
my
you.
My brother was making me laugh.
Thanks for joining us today.
Billy Harmon.
We really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity.
And please
Arky.
Subscribe to the show.
Two-outer.
Hit 'em hard
Job.
and hit 'em off.
That's 36 holes.